I call to order the October 16, 2021 business meeting work session of the Cincinnati Board of Education. In the absence of Treasurer Wagner, Ms. Kim Hughes will be here to serve as our Treasurer pro tempore. Okay, Ms. Hughes, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bates?
Present.
Ms. Bolton?
Present.
Mrs. Bowers? Here. Mr. Lindsey?
Here.
Mr. Messer?
Here.
Mr. Morofsky?
Here.
And Ms. Jones?
Here. Okay, so thank you. Just a little bit of overview. And this is more for our public. As you know, this is a one of two or three maybe work sessions that we have throughout the year where we invite the public to tune in and listen in to the very important topics we have. But we typically do not have a hearing of the public on these, so I want to make sure that folks knew that. But today we have our meeting focus is around two main areas. One is the CPS growth plan, which is one of our strategic initiatives. Some people may know it as the Meridian Plan. So we're going to have some discussion about that. The second item is a fact finding around transportation. So just to kind of set the stage for us, and then we'll begin with the conversation around the CPS growth plan. I have asked Board Member Bolton to sort of introduce what is, and I'm putting that in quote, the Meridian Plan, and to give us, as chair of the Budget and Finance Committee, give us an overview of kind of what was the information that was presented in committee, give us a little historical context. I know that there are other board members that were involved here at that time, and also interim superintendent Amont was the deputy superintendent at that time and did have some involvement in that context. So I'd like to ask you to kind of bring us up and from your perspective where things are. So the intent is to really have a robust conversation. We may at the end want to decide some next steps or make some assignments, but let's put this in context, okay? So that's that particular conversation. The fact finding, what we have talked about with transportation, just recognizing where we are with our transportation. This is going to be the opportunity for us to ask questions and to begin to think about strategically what our options are and what direction we want to go. And part of that conversation, I know in the past we've had numerous thoughts and ideas, and we've made requests to administration about specific data and stuff that we have. So it would be helpful if we could pull all of that in and formulate some kind of strategy for what our next steps will be. But anyway, that's kind of summarizing both of those. We want to get out of here by 2, so I'm going to keep very close dibs on the time, make sure you have enough time for both discussions. So having said that, I'm going to open the floor to Ms. Bolton to introduce the first topic.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the air quotes on the Meridian Plan comment. This district, at least in the last, frankly, 20 years, has been focused on right-sizing and growth. We began with the FMP, where the voters decided to help pay for and allow the board to redesign the entire district physically, and that also includes programmatically. The FMP ended in 2014, and then we had an FMP Plus, which saw the arrival of at least 3 or 4 schools, including Hyde Park, where we got our interim superintendent, and those 4 schools were not in the original master plan, so to speak, facilities master plan, but were added because we saw certain needs, both enrollment-wise and geographically. And some of those are the High Park would be an example that I mentioned. Beyond the FMP plus, those several years, largely due to several things, and I think we pointed out in the written report that has been submitted for the Finance Committee and also a little bit earlier for the whole board. Beyond that FMP plus, because of the arrival of more people and growth, and particularly the arrival, if you will, of an emphasis on preschool, an emphasis on also increasing immigration and refugee attendees to our school district. Other kinds of things were happening both on the west side and the east side, partly due to transportation costs and trying to resolve those differences and those challenges. People began to talk about other ways that we could address both the program and also the physical or the facility piece. The other thing that came up certainly was the fact that there was a perception in the district that there was at least two districts. There was the magnet district and there was the neighborhood district, and that there were two kinds of schools. And there were. And when we began the magnet piece 20-some years ago, indeed it was to preserve the district, preserve, if you will, the middle class, offer more choice. At that same time, we also said we wanted to have high schools of choice so that our families could choose which high school. So there was lots of great initiatives that were occurring. In the midst of the end of Mrs. Ronan's, there was also the recognition that we were really undersized on the west side. And so as Mrs. Ronan began to leave, she's the one that surfaced the possibility of purchasing Mercy. And that then fell to, if you will, the Superintendent Mitchell. So now the focus was west side versus east side. I think the only thing I've ever contributed is just as a social studies teacher was to say Cincinnati is not just a west side, east side city. That, and neither is the district. The district's not even just an urban district. It is a district of outlying areas as well. Very suburban. It's really much more a metropolitan kind of district. My contribution to this, and I've gotten way too much credit for doing this, is to say actually the city of Cincinnati and the transit lines, our mass transit lines, are really running north and south. They really don't run cross town. And more particularly, nobody that lives in the central corridor of our district thinks that they are a west sider or an east sider. In previous years, long before I've been on the board, the district has been either one whole or it's been organized east-west, or for a number of years it was organized as quadrants. The reality from both our treasurer, very senior treasurer, if you will, and our previous superintendent was that we didn't need to have any decentralization, that actually most of our trends have been towards centralization regarding budget and accountability and what have you. So as we started to look at the transportation problem, as we started to look at just how much choice could we afford, how much did we want to save, how much do we want to move ahead, what began to happen was we talked about east and west being equitable or equal, I should say. And you can see that as an example for the Gamble Montessori versus Clark Montessori. We had a board member, Mr. Davis, who was very supportive of the concept of neighborhood high schools. He felt that that's going to the root of many issues in our community, especially among our young, is that they don't have an affection or affinity for their own neighborhood. And me, as finance person, one of the many, I kind of inherited that mantle from Mrs. Bates. The reality is we can't probably afford the level of choice that we have been affording. Two different uses of the word affording. So with all that in mind, what we started to do was concentrate again, or continue to do, is concentrate on growth. And growth, interestingly enough, in an urban district, was one of the 5 initiatives, as President Jones pointed out, one of the 5 initiatives for our strategic plan. And that fell to the Finance Committee as the other strategic initiatives fell to the other board committees. Also, interestingly, layering on that was not just that we are east, west, and central corridor, but indeed many of our high schools particularly have started to really become specific instructional places, be they career tech or be they new tech as it is, or IT, or STEM. And so our high schools, the 15 or so that we have, started to also be part of this, what was, if you will, the My Tomorrow initiative, which was really about getting kids ready for college and career. It was really about trying to figure out how to answer each individual needs of each kid. So these initiatives started to also play on how we're organizing ourselves geographically. Finally, in 5, I guess it's 6 years ago, we also envisioned Vision 2020, which was what's working at our magnets that we can share better with our neighborhood schools. And so what began to happen is our neighborhood schools began to get a specific purpose. That specific purpose, as we found in the first few years of Vision 2020, actually increased the enrollment in our neighborhood schools. And it had a positive effect even on achievement. We had that reported to us in the administration on a number of occasions. So you have this multitude of initiatives, you have the multitude of these challenges, you have a history that has now gone. If we just start with the end of the FMP in 2013, what the Meridian Plan, besides breaking it in the district into 3 portions and finding a way to have equitable, affordable access programmatically for all of our kids and all of our families, we started to outline. And fortunately, in the policy committee back in 2018, with Mrs. Bates and Mr. Moravsky and myself, we looked at the pressures on the east side of town and had community speak a great deal about it, even to the point that it was could be impacting both Pleasant Ridge, Montessori, help me out here, Silverton, Woodford, and JP Parker. And we actually brought that to the board as a committee work regarding even aligning different boundary lines for those except Pleasant Ridge. Pleasant Ridge, it was determined, would just be expanded rather than change its boundary. But the other ones might move from being magnet to neighborhood schools with the boundaries that would be inclusive of what the neighborhood boundaries are recognized by the city. The reason we did that is that there was a new school being created in the central corridor. And the first person to propose that, interestingly enough, was actually President Sellers, who was a native of Clifton, and started to say, look at your numbers in the central corridor. You have a whole bunch of kids, plus, Mrs. Bates had pointed out, we all did, had to stop having the camping out at Fairview German. So bringing those issues together, the lottery, and then also the lack of schools in the central corridor, caused us to create CANs, Clifton Area Neighborhood School, and we would do it according to the actual neighborhood's outlines, which included Spring Grove Village, Clifton Heights, University Heights, whatever. And it would be those boundaries. When we did that, we said what will happen is if we do that, we can now also look at there's 3 or 4 schools, so this is the last I'll mention, and they were Winton Hills, Pleasant Hill, College Hill Fundamental, and Mount Airy. That if you actually created CANs, what was the proposal was that you would readjust those boundaries. So the children that are in Winton Terrace aren't driving past their own school to get to Pleasant Hill, and the Pleasant Hill community would actually be in College Hill instead of dividing Mount Airy up and saying part of Mount Airy was in College Hill, which it's not. Or you would then have the Mount Airy neighborhood, which also reaches down towards through the full range. And then, it would also impact Chase. That was a suggestion that did not get implemented. And part of the Meridian Plan is that we continue to recognize the importance of neighborhood schools, the importance of walkability, the importance of a green district that isn't spending so much time and money on buses, and also to kind of reinvigorate that. Last part is the expansion of Montessori. We actually have fewer magnets than we did 15 years ago. We've reduced those because some of them we said they're not authentic, whether it was, Paideia or whatever. But moving these things around, and so you actually have truth in advertising, but you also are rededicating yourselves to the neighborhood. One issue that is so critical, though, is that we don't want to further segregate our district. And the issue with that is, right now, where we have highly integrated neighborhoods, we don't have integrated neighborhood schools. So it's more telling there. Another one, there were twice as many children in Avondale when the facilities master plan was developed than there are now. There are twice more kids, not less, in the Madisonville area and the east side. We've created 100 different classrooms of preschoolers since the facilities master plan is done. We have also clientele schools that have a majority of kids that are, English is not their first language. And indeed, that's determined, too, as to how we organize ourselves, because some of those need to be citywide, some things need to be on the west side, some of the high schools probably should be neighborhood schools, which is what Mr. Davis was saying, but probably not all of them, because our children need as much choice, especially as they look at the career schools, and they also look at the exclusive schools, or that you have to, test into, or you look at our Montessori program. Indeed, if we did this along the way conscientiously, we can keep a large degree of choice, make much more adequate the access for our families, rediscover what was always at our heart in Cincinnati as the neighborhood, and then also try to be able to afford this in a way that allows us to continue to grow. So all the Meridian Plan is it's a historical chronicle, if you will, and actually needs to be added to, because my understanding is that what I think I've heard this indirectly, and what we're living out right now, is that we probably not only need, I would agree with Mrs. Bates, a third Montessori high school, but it's probably looking numerically, number-wise, we're probably going to need another career technical school, perhaps on the west side. Because right now we have, most of our high schools are, not, I won't say overcrowded, but fully loaded, if you will. So there's lots of things to do. The last point, Oakley. The Oakley area, too, is reaching a point where they are going to be demanding to try to have a neighborhood high school, neighborhood school. So that's the historical perspective. And the reason it's Meridian is that if you talk in terms of hemisphere, you can only have two. Meridian, you can have, 360 of them if you need, but it also runs north-south like transportation. Thank you.
So thank you for that historical context. There was a lot of information I took notes. Okay, look at my page. Okay, lots of things to comment on. So let me open it up to other board members if you want to add, and I do, but I'm always my turn, and the other board members have comments about that. I also want to make sure that Ms. Unlock gets an opportunity. We're not going to be formal today, okay? Because I'm stumbling over calling people by their formal title. Tiana, okay? All right, go ahead.
over again. When you saw me holding my four fingers with quiet, I want to leave that out. Because I remember quiet. So with that being said, I'm Salem Park is left off from here. I just want you to know that on my map. Okay. But nevertheless, I agree about being cognizant of schools being more segregated, which my concern was with Mr. Davis's idea, going back to some of that. And then the idea, I don't want to forget the concern for students with disabilities. There are students going from the west side all the way up to Riverview East. And how do we look at that when we are, thinking about these things? I don't know how, as a district, just being able to have those accessibility and available classrooms with that also, because sometimes that can be a burden again. But I appreciate the overview. And the background helps me to understand better why this is a bigger concern than what I initially thought it was. I appreciate that.
Okay. Melanie and then Dan.
Yeah, I think another way you need to look at this is kind of a way, well, a variety of ways. Number one, our wait list. And that's how some of our schools came about. When Dater had, a wait list in kindergarten, like 300 kids. What are we doing with these children? We opened up the Montessori when, Fairview was saturated. We opened up Cannes and two of them. Purge. Anyway, yeah, maybe Carthage. So we satisfied using the wait list as a basis, as our pool, and moving, encouraging people to go there. We haven't received the wait list yet, I don't believe, from this last lottery round. But that would be telling, and then, later on we can make that assignment so the board can receive that information. We should at least have, that ready by now, because that first round has been completed as of about a month ago, right? Secondly, he was talking about the neighborhoods and how we have integrated neighborhoods, but the schools aren't integrated. For goodness sakes, what do people want? Evanston is now becoming more integrated. The school is not. And wasn't that like one of our losers last year? I don't know if the outreach isn't there, if people aren't aware of what's going on at Evanston School. I'm using that because that school doesn't have to be redone. That school is a very, very good school. What we need to do is engage the community so that it becomes a school that is integrated. Everything's there, but that's kind of it's definitely, that's one of those low-hanging fruit, I think, is especially that school to use as a model to help with the John P. Hartford and Chases and those things. And the other thing that we need to, I think, really focus on is our Hispanic population. And I know we have Robert, but we have, IDEA opening up on the west side of school, the old Christian school property. And they're going to be focusing on the Hispanic population because that's where they had success in Texas. And we really need to have a concerted effort to satisfy that they're not going to show up on wait lists because they're going to be recruited into that school. So, one way is, and I know the Meridian Plan is looking at the physical buildings and where they're placed, but also, we have some real opportunities with our wait list, with, really using Evanston School as a model to integrate using the demographics of that neighborhood and to really focus on, attracting our Hispanic students and expanding on the west side for programs that would be, very beneficial to that population. So those are kind of my ideas that I guess would really enlarge the scope of the Meridian Plan and focus on, in a couple of areas.
I'm sorry.
I'm done.
Okay. Then, and if we intend to get through the conversation, I want everybody to say, we're still, we could kind of make it a little more
I'm
complex.
super fast, super fast. This was just a couple clarifying questions for you. I was trying to keep track of two sets of things. One is like, what are the problems we're solving for? And then the other was, what is the proposed change, like from what to what? And that would just help people have a better opinion, I think, about what was on the table. And so I tracked a number of different, really important issues that originated. I wanted to make sure I got them and not missing any. The one I heard was, like people having access to great neighborhood schools and walkability for communities feels important. Another one I heard is about right-sizing campuses. We have some that are over-enrolled, some that are under-enrolled. Another thing about transportation costs and how much we pay to move kids across the district. And then there are a whole series of other values we have that we want to improve integration. We want to preserve choice for families. Does that miss any?
I think you've got those. I think we is finding a way to accommodate growth, because we must continue to grow. And also the whole choice of the whole expansion of Montessori. Because with the exception of one Montessori building, our most diverse enrollments are among our Montessori. And really, part of the issue of segregation is it's not just a racial issue for us, but it is an economic issue. We have way too much segregation among economic groups. And I would also add a new one is to the competition from charters, certainly, which is something. And then the other idea is this exploding number regarding immigrant refugees of all languages. I think that's something. So those would be some of the others.
I'm not at this point like saying pro or con on one end of this. Some of it is still super important to me. Some of this I want to learn more about.
Sure.
So, and what's the? I just wanted to make sure I understood that. What's the going from what to what?
The proposal is to move ahead with what we have been talking about for a number of years. And then the other is at least recognizing how we're going to deal with choice in high school. Which ones might be continue to be choice, which things are citywide, which things are west side, east side for enrollment. And the other piece is to recognize, if you will, we need to reevaluate what is a magnet that is performing and a magnet that isn't. And is it possible to use some magnets to neighborhood status?
Okay. I think I have lots of follow-up questions, but that's all.
Okay, yeah, I want to, because we're short on time, I really want to make sure everybody gets a chance to speak. I think as we sum things up, there may be some things like we can ask for in terms of the next step. Mike?
Just two quick things. And one, going off Ms. Bates' point, and I agree with Ms. Bates in a lot of ways regarding the neighborhood. I think I said something to this effect here before, but I just want to put out there again that our strategy to get families in these neighborhoods, I'll just use Evanston because you brought it up, I think it's a great example. We are never going to out-program people's racism and implicit bias ever, and or their preconceived notions of the school. And I think the only way that this works is family to family. And I don't know what our outreach needs to look like that way, because our schools, and I'll just use our neighborhood school where James will go, Porter doesn't have the reputation of having a great school. Maybe I have, a bias because I'm in the school that I see it, but I know it's a great school. But that doesn't even matter. People, if the school is the best ranked in the whole district. So whatever our community engagement strategy goes, because I tend to favor the Meridian Plan has for 4 years, and we were all policy together. Whatever that looks like is going to have to fundamentally change somehow and be like almost like living room to living room. I feel like that's the only way to really desegregate schools. So I want to put that out there. But then the second is the number one thing on our list of expectations and goals from Meridian Plan is maybe the most striking to me, which is providing the equitable instructional programming. So, i.e., we have career tech over here, but not over here. I think ironing those pieces out first, or maybe we can do both and at the same time. I just think it's important to do it at the same time. So right now, in my opinion, we have Montessori covered, Gamble covered. West Side has a lot of career tech, but nothing like Woodward, for example. So how, do we balance it out before? we do go over, if we go that way, or do we do it at the same time? Those are the only two things I but.
Okay. Ryan?
Yeah, so I definitely appreciate the historical piece, and that gets us here to today. I think, the reason it probably feels like people have a lot to say in a short amount of time is, I personally don't think it's the right time yet. I don't know how you do this work without having the superintendent who's going to be leading us. So I think timing is a key piece, but I also think until the strategic plan is updated, and where we did before, just 2 or 3 years out, at this venture, when this much change, there's going to have to be some very concerted bets on what's happening in 10 years. Where's population moving? Who do we want to be in 10 years? Then, once you kind of have that, you scope the project. Then you call on my top one is define the why. What are we solving for? And I think there's a lot of people have different reasons. You've got to get that on there. Then how does this work scoped and structured? I think our role as if you look at a standard project, we're the sponsors. The work is done by the administration. We provide the governance, the guidance, but there will be a working team, at least in my head, of a variety of stakeholders who would actually do the work. We have to figure out who specifically needs to be at the table and a part of that. And once all that is clearly defined, then the work can be executed as a project plan with the project leader the whole bit. So I think key questions for today, and I think we have this at finance and growth, but do we have this? Is this something that the new superintendent should just come parachute in on, or is this part of the new superintendent's role and responsibility to take the district to the next level? And at that time, I think the work we could do is to set the charter. What are we trying to solve for? I think people will have very different views until we get something down on paper that people can say, this is what it is. Community's weighed in on this is what it is. We've presented on this what it is. Then the work actually starts.
Okay, so I'll add my comment, and then I really want Tiane to comment on this. I have a whole page, and pardon me if I sound fragmented. I think it really helped me to put it in this book, because now, and after reading the material, I remember the conversations that we had as part of our planning around our strategic plan. I think for the most part, I agree with sort of the content and the concept. But I need to say, we should stop calling it a plan.
Exactly.
It is not the Meridian Plan. It is putting emphasis on what our strategic initiative, where is our strategic initiative around growth? Where is that? And the concepts and the content of what was defined here, it makes perfect sense that we do some sort of assessment of where we are, because here's what has happened, and here's where I agree with what Ryan is saying. The timing of bringing this huge initiative called, however people call it, I'm not going to call it Meridian, but this plan, this concept back on the table, the timing of it just doesn't sort of fit where we are. We've had to deal with COVID, and we've had to deal now with this transportation issue. We don't have any idea in terms of these quadrants and where people are and what we need. We know something. We know we still have a need for Montessori. We know that we want to make our schools more equitable and more racially diverse, and we know all of that. But we don't know any more than that in terms of where are our kids, what's going on, what's different as a result of COVID, what's different, the transportation situation. When we talk about these high schoolers, that's what I remember the most when Mr. Davis was on the board, and we were talking about these quadrants and all of that, and how we need to make the neighborhood schools look more like the neighborhood, that kind of thing. We were talking about that. And especially when we were talking about the high school, I think our high schools would look really different now. And I would want to know more about how the changes in transportation, which is where this conversation started to begin with. It was around the minimizing the cost of transportation, but what does that look like and feel like right now? So I think there's a lot more evaluation and assessment that for me. It is what is happening right now. So everything that Ms. Bolden has said and the states have said, it makes perfect sense to me because we were moving along a path where this probably would have been implemented. But I think, and then also the other sort of situation that we were thrusting in was when the superintendent left.
Yes.
So that left a gap right there because we sort of lost momentum through no fault of anybody, but sort of lost momentum on that. So I kind of agree with Ryan that the timing of implementing this right now, it just doesn't seem right. But maybe what we can do is take a step back and start to refocus the effort on smaller scale so that we can get ready to kind of develop a more thorough approach.
Very quickly, I agree with what everybody has said. I don't find any difference in what we're reading. To Mike's point about the issue of the school, part of that prejudice is really driven by economics as well as race. And it's very important people make the determination that somehow if you have a high number of disadvantaged, then somehow the quality of education is so bad. But all the statistics show that that's exactly false.
Yes.
We can prove it, that that's false. The other thing is part of the neighborhood piece. I think if we are authentic about the neighborhood boundaries instead of the created neighborhood boundaries of many years ago, I think you would have more of an identity and an adoption of saying willing to go to that. And then I think this is the continuation of history. It's we're still in the third year of our strategic plan, and we need another strategic plan. And solving one problem, this is the problem we have with transportation. You probably can't solve the transportation problem unless you do some more comprehensive things happening. So as big as it is, I think you have to almost be looking at the whole picture to start to do some of the.
I agree with that. We almost have to look at the whole picture, and that's why I'm feeling like I'm prepared to move forward with anything else other than sort of taking another look at this.
Right.
Because I happen to believe, just like I believe we need more magnets, I believe we need more Montessori seats. We also need to relook not only the high schools and the choices of, the high schools of choice, but we also need to look at, I just lost my train of thought. We also need to look at the magnet program.
Yes.
That's huge. When we talk about racial inequities, there you go. So we need to look at a lot of those things. So, I think we're all on the same page in terms of people. What I'm hearing is people are valuing it and find there's a need for us to kind of rethink this. So maybe, and I do want to hear from Tiana, but how can we move forward in a way where this isn't feeling rushed, or we can, I don't want to say start from scratch, but sort of reprioritize or refocus our efforts a little bit around this. So I'll be quiet, and then Tiana, if you want to have comment about this, because you were actually involved as the deputy superintendent, were you
actually in two hats. First, I'll talk on a broader level. I was initially brought into the fold of the growth plan on a district-wide perspective, being a participant on staff. And it really started with the proper report and the transportation issue and trying to be more efficient. But because we really are branded as a district of choice, then the conversation evolved on equal programming on both sides, quadrant, Meridian. So that was the conversation I was involved in. But another hat that I wore was the principal of Hyde Park. The school was closed, and I had the wonderful opportunity to reopen And it is successful because of community engagement. Bottom line, when CAN started, I connected them to High Park. So when we look at next steps, I would highly recommend a comprehensive approach. So as the principal of High Park, in year 3, I knew we were going to be on. I had a conversation after conversation as a principal in year 3. But it was isolated, it was siloed, right? So I really didn't know what was necessarily going on at CRM or the other schools or the west side. But sitting and having this perspective as an interim superintendent, I really believe it needs to be a comprehensive approach, strong community engagement, and alignment to the future of the strategic plan. This is all a part of that, and part of the strategic plan is these are the steps we're going to get to answering that question of what are we trying to solve. So.
Okay, great. So I think what we can do in these last sort of almost 15 minutes is really focus our efforts on what are our next steps, what information do we need, what are our next steps, where do we go from here, however you want to summarize. What are people feeling like they need in terms of data, that kind of. Why don't we start there? And if I'm missing something, please let me know.
I just wanted to add one other around Evanston and Hyde Park. Evanston also has low enrollment because we wanted Hyde Park to be more diverse. So as the principal of Hyde Park, you have Oakley. I was to 3 council meetings. I was to Hyde Park, Oakley, and Evanston have a great relationship with Ms. Atkins, who since retired. So it's also about boundaries, right? We wanted a diverse Hyde Park, so although there may be families who are fine with going to Evanston, but we set up the boundary so Hyde Park can be diverse. So I just want to give that little perspective as well.
Okay. Brian?
Yeah, I think the tip of the spear is, I think we have to hire a superintendent. Then I think we have to do a strategic plan. Then I think out of that scopes the work for this. And, I think we can all give our opinions and that type of thing. It's going to be a new board. Going to be a new superintendent. And, there will be change management throughout the community anytime that, there may be change and may grandfather in, but people are like, well, I wanted my neighbors to go that and say, well, this changed with it. The new superintendent, the new board, they're going to have to own all that. And so my opinion is it would be hurried to not kind of do things sequentially to get the right people at the table, knowing we've got some seats.
Okay, other comments? Melanie, and we'll
A couple things, but what I heard is let's slow down. But we didn't tell Mary Ronan to slow down when she was in. We didn't. And Mary went forward with a huge academic initiative. So I don't know why we're telling Tiani to slow down at dinner when we didn't tell Mary to slow down.
But there are a couple of really big differences. Can I just comment on that? We had a very solid strategic plan when we were on track, and this probably would have been farther along. But when COVID hit, Mary didn't have to deal with COVID, and the transportation piece. It's not even so much. I think if we say it right here today to ask our leadership now to do it, they would do it. But I think that our strategic plan was halted, right? And I think we need time. I really do feel like we need time to get our footing back. That's all I'm saying. It has nothing to do with the fact that we're, whatever we ask her to do, I'm sure she will do. So it's not that I think of that, but I just happen to believe that here we are. I wasn't here when was Mary an interim? I wasn't here. Okay. I wasn't here, I don't know what that's like. But given our situation right now with the fact that we weren't able to continue with our strategic plan, of course, it's a strategic plan, coupled with the fact that this is a district that is trying to become stable as a result of COVID and all the changes. That for me, that's where the focus should be. That's all.
Well, the other part of that is that I don't think, again, back to, what happened historically. And I, you could say COVID hit and that's based on what we're doing. But when this board heard that we had 1,000 kids on the waiting list for preschool, what did we do? What did we do? We opened up, even before preschool counted. When we saw that there were hundreds, thousands of kids on waiting lists for many schools, what did we do? We didn't tell people to wait until we were grounded. And I believe we need to move, if we have people who want to be part of this district, we shouldn't tell them to wait until we become more stable. We have a good base here.
Yeah, but we're not saying let's not do anything. We're saying let's reprioritize and let's refocus. There are things certainly that our current leadership can do to help us gain the footing for how we move forward. But a lot of this stuff, we're talking about reshifting the entire system. We have to replan that. I mean, our strategic focus around that really got stopped. And I'm not saying let's just lay that here. I'm saying there are things that we can do right now. I just don't think looking at the whole plan saying we're going to implement this plan. That's just me, but so I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just thinking that it just needs to be prioritized in something. But that's just me.
And who's going to prioritize?
We are. So that's why we're asking what are the next steps around here. I hear you saying, well, we didn't have, you're saying globally, we need to do this, and I think we all agree. But it is, where do we start? What do we need to look at? What information do we, what happens? And Yana is going to do, I think she's the leader for us right now, and kind of where we are today, what comes out of this meeting, we would hope and expect that she follow up with that. That's all.
So we're going to develop that within the next half hour.
I'm asking for next steps. I don't know what we're going to develop. What's the next steps of how we should move forward?
Okay.
Yeah, again, something nothing wrong because I'm agreeing with everybody, even when they're in opposite positions. So I'm not sure, but I think the next steps are that, first of all, we have right now a strategic plan in place. It got stymied two-thirds of the way through its first year, and we lost much of last year because of COVID. We're in our third year where we can look and see what the community agreed with and what we put on that table, and we can see what we can still get done from that third year, in the third year, based particularly on growth, as this is about growth. And I think we could find those things where there is some still consensus, as well as data driving some decisions for us. As we, and again, this is never meant to be implemented fully. It's not, and whatever changes would be there, you grandfather families in. There's all kinds of things as you transition. But I would suggest we commit to the third year. We commit to the existing strategic plan, knowing that next year, we'll be adding to it, or is it fourth, fifth year, or it would be all brand new, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But there are things that we have consensus about in this particular list. We find those points, and we also ask the administration to put the data together that shows us what are pressing issues that Melanie was talking about.
I agree with that.
I think that's what we could do.
Yeah.
And the people have been owning this. So I think we can really do some important stuff. And I do think transportation in part is the key to begin to unlock the larger part of the of this plan.
So I'll put on there the transportation kind of, overview of
Yeah.
this piece. When you say you think people have bought into it, what people are you, who are you talking about?
I'm talking in terms of people showing us with their feet that they want to do more Montessori, and it's obvious the numbers are there. We know that our Vision 2020, we saw an increase in enrollment and achievement in most of the neighborhood schools in the first 2 years of the Vision 2020. We know too that there is a community is deeply committed to expanding career and college readiness. And we are a PK 16 district. And we know that the community is committed to preschool. I honestly believe that the neighborhoods would also like to have at the center of the neighborhood an actual neighborhood school.
Okay, so we need to do more community engagement.
Sure.
But that's what I'm asking.
Yes, and no
Because
question
when you
about
say
that.
there are people committed, I want to know, so I don't think I know. So if it's a community engagement, just finding out where that is. Okay, Pam and then Ryan.
Yeah, and I also heard data that showed that there was an academic, probably to be visited, especially with the information that just came out of Edgewater, how much work we have to get back on track with.
That's right.
So that is priority right now for me,
Sure.
trying to get back on track some kind of way. But to validate, even the change of a neighborhood school or the change of a magnet school, I think I would need to see data around that, slow down, get all of them, and be strategic and intentional in that, for me. So that would be ideal.
Agreed.
I wrote down.
Yeah, I think, I mean, if there's, some people just want something, you know, they take up the, December holidays, we got really Thanksgiving week, there's not that many weeks. It'd be a win, I think, just to get it down on paper, what are we solving for? What's the charter? What's the purpose? What are we solving for? I don't even think, I don't think we even know half of that, really. There's other things I think people would want to solve for. Just getting that, who are the stakeholders we need to be? What groups need to be engaged? I think we can come with our charter so everybody can see one document. Okay, this is what it is. And that's a hefty process, just to get everybody aligned to that and get a common playbook so that everybody's singing from the same hymn. So to me, that if there was one step that we could do, knowing that we're just a few weeks from people taking new seats and everything, at least that would be a chunk of work that could be a start.
Okay. Go ahead.
I just want to clarify, administration has been full force on the strategic plan. So we have not halted, we have not slowed down, because that's the purpose of the strategic plan, to give a blueprint to administration. So whatever is decided, administration is capable of and able to implement that. But right now, we have been following the strategic plan because it has community engagement, it's in print, and it has that.
Okay, and so here's what I'm hearing from everybody. I don't think any of us are disagreeing. Am I right about that?
Right.
We're not disagreeing about it. But I think what we have down are some concrete next steps about what we want to know. The question about what are we solving for? How do we, who are the stakeholders? Where's the consensus? What is the data telling us? That gives some next steps for administration. The question about when do we want this information? That's crucial. And then where does it lie? So do we want this information part of a school board conversation? Do we want to send it back to committee? How do we want to work with it?
I think it can go both ways, but other committees can also take on some of the issues that are part of this, whether it's the walkability goes to health. I don't think it should be this whole, owner be the finance and growth committee, although that's what we assigned it initially. But I think finding out what we would need to know from the administration. The administration can also tell us what we need to know.
That's right.
If we don't know enough, then
So it's like needing a report on where are we with this strategic initiative. I mean, that's a pretty straightforward one that I think will be simple enough to provide some sort of presentation around. Okay.
I appreciated the superintendent saying that, hey, they've been still using that as the Bible, as the guide. And I appreciate that, and the community will too.
So I think, just to be clear, we're not saying that we're gonna halt everything until we hire a new superintendent. What we are, I think, I haven't heard anybody say, timing of this has been weird, because we've had things happen. But we can keep the work moving forward, and that's what I hear us agreeing to. Okay. All right. Any questions? And I wrote down some notes, and our staff is on listening in, so hopefully we can clean it up. Tiana, for you.
I just want to make sure the assignment is update on strategic plan, go through. Is it specific to growth plans based on this conversation?
It is, where are we right now with this
Okay.
particular priority? I will also give you sort of a summary of some of the questions, specifics that came up as a result of this conversation.
Okay.
And including the wait list for the magnet school and the high school. Because that was an issue at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, you're out of order, Madam President.
No, that was the time, all right. Wait list for, repeat that, wait
For
list.
magnet schools and for the high school.
Okay, Dan?
I do really like the way Ryan framed it a second ago, and I think for
Yeah.
Tiana and staff, it's like, as we think about where might there need to be in terms of assignment patterns or magnet eligibility or education or growth, I think it's like step one, what are the current issues we're solving for? Like where are there over the magnet or under or like an absence of, I'm trying to look back to my list, but just what are the issues out there that need to get figured out in whatever next configuration we set up. It's not like build a plan for what that configuration is or make changes in what the assignment has. Like what are the concerns, issues, landscape that we're trying to address in whatever the next. I want to check that I heard that right. My hope is that that's an easier ask than other versions.
Is that a little guidance?
Yeah.
Am I wrong? Tell me if I'm wrong.
No.
You just kind of walked us through the steps of kind of like what we're looking for. Is one broad question and then subcategories of that. So I think we're okay. So are we all in a good place?
Can we, as this proceeds, rather than just the finance and growth owning it, I would hope that there are some parts of this conceivably that other committees could start to think about. I mean, whether it's enrollment policies or whatever, I think it would be helpful so that we all get how varied and deep it is.
And how you like information presented. Email, is it cloud, is it a board meeting? Is it fact finding and that?
I make a suggestion, especially on the update on the strategic plan, because that community invented it. I think that would be a good presentation to the board, just for the community.
Yeah. It might even be, what is the date? Is November, for the November 3rd Cal meeting? Would that be?
Well, we get the superintendent thing happening.
That's an executive
That's
session, though.
It's both.
Oh, but if you, I mean, this can be a presentation,
Yes.
and then, I mean, mine is not gonna take an hour and a half. Okay, is that good? So November 3rd. Okay. All right. We're good with that particular item. Okay, and, to Ms. Bolton, a little break. Mr. Boyd, Daniel, Is it possible for you to come up closer since we're about to talk about the transportation piece?
Yes, ma'am.
This particular, part of the agenda is around, it's supposed to be a fact finding around transportation. Oh, no, you're too far back. Come on up. It actually doesn't need to be fact finding, yeah, it doesn't have to be fact finding. The intent was, as I understand it, is that we wanted to have a discussion about where are we now? The big question, what are we solving for? And to think about some strategic options for how we move forward. What is our next steps and where do we want to go? Yeah.
Could ask, Ms. Lon to come, she has prepared something.
Oh, sure, come on up.
Information, and I can pass that information out that was asked to you that time.
Okay, you all have to forgive me if I stand up. I have to.
Do it.
Thank you. Okay, so let's, if we could first summarize, like, where we are now. My recollection from our last meeting, board, we talked about, we had an update of where things were with SORTA, where we were, and I believe our discussion was more focused around what are our next steps? Are there next steps? What are they? And so today's conversation started out while you were out. We asked whether or not this even needed to be a fact finding. It doesn't have to be. So we need to really summarize, and any one of us can do that. You can do that if you'd like. Summarize where we are, and then we can have some conversation and ask questions that will lead us into deciding what our next steps are, if there are any, and any strategies that might support what we want to do. And I'm done. So did you want to give an opening on that?
No, I'm just anxious to hear the new data
Okay.
and the status as to where we are.
Wonderful. So that's
That's great.
Thank you for Dr. Moore. This is just an update of conversations we've had with Florida and Metro and where we are right now. So after many roundabouts trying to get data from them,
Oh, yeah.
we finally got some information on the number of unique riders that are currently using their transportation system, and that's in Appendix A. And so, for students that we're responsible for providing transportation, 7,102 students are actually unique bus passes that we can. So that's from the beginning of school all the way to October. So we're being charged $315 for bus class, and based on the invoice that Florida sent us, total of over 14,000 passes are in PDK. So of course, when we do the math, there's a huge discrepancy with how many passes are actually being used and how many passes are in things. But in my next step, I include that we're going to be looking at obtaining the maximum funds that we can, so that money can be allocated for finding alternative means of transportation for our students. Communication with parents. One of the asks was that they mail a letter to the parents about the exact route that's best for their student, for their child, to and from school. And as you can see in Appendix B and Appendix C, this is asked for a sample of what that letter will look like. Mind you, that letter has not been sent out yet. And as you look at this letter, the parent has to actually decipher a code and find that code on a list of links that will appear on your website. Probably not on the website, but And then once they find the link on the website, they click it and then they still have to download. So I gently explained to Mr. Haley that that's probably not the best letter to hear.
Definitely.
And that, you know, there's a series of issues that families who don't have internet have, you know, there's additional steps that parents have to do. The whole coding thing, deciphering what code to use. So, what he said was, that if there's an issue, that parents can reach out to SORTA and they will help them out. They will help them with that.
Did they answer the phone then?
You think? Somebody answer the phone. You gotta settle that thing.
So we're still in conversation. I'm going to still push on getting, I want to do the data. I've asked for a flat file of all of our, but IDs, like in with our students, and every time that those Buck IDs have changed in the system. And they told me they were not able to provide the course information.
It would have been great if we could have been.
But she has to feel free to go behind and forth and.
Do they fall under public records?
Can we do a records request?
Yeah.
Yeah, they do.
They do it to us.
Well, I would think that they would, but we need to find out.
I mean, there shouldn't be anything to hide here. I think that's
Yeah.
at the very least, let's ask our friends at the council to ask them as well. You know, but I think that we can check them.
The reason why, I wanted that information is because, not in all transparency, I feel like their data is.
Oh, yeah.
We also received another report that shows all of a sudden the number. There were some days that showed over 8,000, and when I asked Mr. Haley, are those 8,000 each student? Or can one student be trained 4 times, two buses going, 2 buses, and he didn't have an answer. And so I feel as sophisticated as their system is, they should be able to tell me for each of these bus pass, how many times that pass changed each day. And that with that plot file, we can do our own.
Okay, I think we have a couple more questions, Eve and Mike.
Okay. Again, I think it was Mr. Lindsay that raised the first time, at least publicly, about the quality and the authenticity of the Metro data. And I appreciated that question when he asked, and I think we just have the proof. We should be suspicious of the data that they are sending us, period, over and done with. And I, again, ask on the number of people like we're responsible for, you said something about 7,000 are riding. Those are unique students. And it's 1 pass each, or more passes, if we're doing the big pass.
Right, this is the 1 pass, and these are the kids who, have used their cards one or multiple times from August 23rd to October 13th. So there are kids who have been assigned a pass that have never used them. And so that's what that 7,122 reflects. Those who have used the pass, whether they use it every day, once a month,
Where to go shopping? All right, does it show if they go someplace else besides their school or just another? It does, okay. I have a question too, and they wouldn't answer it, or they answered it kind of weird. I want to appreciate the fact that Tiana was very insistent upon, why don't you tell us the most direct route? Because it's like an independent, individual transportation plan. They said, oh, yeah, part of that, but my issue here is, does this also pertain to the parochial and the charter schools?
Yeah.
So we do now have proof that those kids are being transported, because the other times that we've gotten the data, it shows like 7 people or 8 people, and there used to be many, many more. At least the old data shows that there are many, many more people, charter and parochial, that were using it. But as of like September 15th, it's less than 2 dozen or so.
So we, this was based on, the list that Florida gave us. You can see that, like.
Good.
But, I still have to
reconcile this list with the list that we do for transportation, because there are other schools that we went out. Right, and these weren't even on some of the initial charts, was that right, Johnny? And it was like, wait, what's going on? So that's of interest. And then finally, so we're looking at 7,000 kids, and we're being charged, what, for 14,000 or what?
So the overall invoice was based on,
14,146.
right, and so they divide that by 3, that's right, Dan? And so their invoice is based on a third of that amount. So it's based on that 14,146 times 315, and they're telling us that, we have half of those kids who are actually.
And is that the first one that was that $2 million one? I mean, we had to pay that because we wanted to make sure the kids got to school, even under these conditions. But now it's obvious that this is very important. Very important fixes.
And then
Go ahead.
it was, I don't know if it related to that song. No, I was going to, there was a second part of the assignment was, to talk to the schools, individual schools and like that. So we do have that here too, but I don't know if you want to go on that or just stay on the topic.
Okay, I believe Mike had a question.
No.
Okay, Pam?
I already get through to the other guy. So my question, and I know you haven't presented it, but I see that some responses to some of the increase. Do we have the actual, I hear the increase number of students in the process of the party. Do we have an actual absentee and party percentage compared to 2019, 2020 and this year at this time?
Your question will have that.
Okay.
But the problem though with the 5 at time, next time doesn't mean that the bus will.
Okay, so we can't correlate it.
What we can, and that's one of the questions I believe, did the bus pickup, we can monitor pickup, was the bus to pick up the kids from school to take them home with them. But we can't monitor, well, we don't have that data of the kid miss the bus. So
when they come into the school and they get a tardy slip, there's no tracking up. I'm sorry because the bus skipped me. I'm sorry because the bus didn't come. I'm sorry because I woke up late. There's no computer. Okay.
limited,
Okay.
I can't say that.
Based on the.
Kind of this is really helpful.
I'm sorry?
This is genuinely really helpful.
Right.
I mean, it's like, it's super discouraging and depressing, but it's sort of helpful to have it. So that's one thing. On appendix A, where it says that we've got the 7,102 unique students happening this year. What was that last year? Ballpark?
I have some for comparison data, I only got it. But I will continue to ask if I can get it, and I couldn't say, can I get at least 2 years of data? And this is what I got.
I have a bunch of thoughts about that, but we can say that.
Okay, so one of the things that I think we want to know is where's the comparative data? We want to.
Pre-COVID.
Pre-COVID. Sorry, Mike? I didn't-
No, I said, we've said that like 1,000 times. All of it out. I just think it's so great. Like, it's too much territory.
So that could be part of the open meeting, open request. Okay, go ahead.
I feel like we keep seeing the same story over and over and over.
Yeah.
Which is that CPS is doing backflips to try to make this work in the best way we possibly can. And all of our anecdotal reporting and the survey data says that it's really bad. And SORTA is either unwilling or unable to produce information that suggests this is in any way improved. And so for me, I think like we can talk lots more about the details on any of those things. I feel like we've been there for 6 weeks. And I would be shocked if the punchline changes. So for me, the question is, what are we going to do? And I don't know. I think one of the things that is hard in this is I feel like we have so little. You know, like and that's not a judgment on anyone. It is a description of the situation. But I think I'm trying to think of like, what are the sources of leverage we have. I don't know, like, have we ever done anything, I mean, yes, would we like hold our own hearing, like professional hearing styles and like address to it? Like, we've done these meetings with City Hall, and like, we have people from Florida here and like force them to answer some questions in front of some news cameras or something. Like, I don't know that that does anything, but it's, and I'm open to other ideas, but I just I'm looking for ways of leverage to get them to change something, because it certainly does look bad.
Go ahead, Melanie.
Okay, are we part of the conversation in Evanston now with the uptick in violence and concern around our schools in that neighborhood? Because I know that on the front burner for city council, and there's a hearing that's coming up on Monday. So, I mean, that's a forum that we don't even have to organize, but certainly the safety of our children in that neighborhood is a huge concern. So, my question would be, you know, can we become involved, at least attending, providing some kind of testimony at that meeting from this perspective regarding the safety of our kids, now that that's a heightened topic in Evanston? I mean, that's just something that's just coming up that sounds like a Ben's idea.
Hold on, yeah. Go ahead.
I hear what you're saying, Ellie, but this is a heightened issue across the whole city,
Right,
not just Evanston.
right.
I mean, if
But
I
that's
take
something
one
we
to talk
can do
about,
Monday. And, I mean, we can't, I mean, that's something we could do Monday. We want to do something across the city.
Okay, so I hear your point, and I'm not disagreeing with that. I think we're all concerned about the safety issue, but I'm trying to ask how you're connecting this to the bus situation. I'm just trying to make that connection.
Right, because of the heightened, you know, activity, gun activity in Evanston. And now we have children from Evanston Academy walking. We have children who are taking the bus and waiting at bus stops.
Okay.
And that's how we can connect it. And in a ready-made environment, I mean, we can't go because we have a meeting, right? That would be on Monday.
not Monday.
The 18th, well, we could go then, but there should be something here, you know, but I do think that it would be a good idea as a start to have a presence there. And then as that progresses through the city, which seems to be a priority, since we have, you know, terrible gun violence problems and there's a council election, there are going to be more of these. So that's a way to heighten, you know, the visibility of this problem in the community without us having to, you know, have not duplicates, but having our own forum. And connected to the, you know, to a safety issue in the city, which it is. I mean, I'd be picking up my kids from Walnut Hills and Evanston if I were a parent.
I have to say I agree with you, 100%, because the first thing that, you know, when I heard about it, first thing I thought about is our kids catching the bus.
Mm-hmm.
I believe sort of would say, you can't link that to the fact that, I mean, they would say that. You can't link it to the fact that the bus, you know, is like, I don't know, but it's like, not taking responsibility on their end. And I want to know how can we validate or substantiate that? You know, it's a heightened concern, but how do we substantiate or look at how the bus service or the bus stops or whatever contribute to that?
Because of the wait time. Before our kids would get picked up as soon as school was dismissed.
Okay.
Now they have to wait for buses, so they're in the community waiting for buses. And I
Which
think
makes
them more vulnerable to the violence that's occurring. And, you know, we've seen drive-bys of innocent people, you know, and it's very frightening. I'm sure it is to everyone that our kids are out there waiting for buses in these environments. And we should express that.
I just think that even if that violence weren't there, if it went away tomorrow, this would still be bad.
Right,
But that's fine.
that's correct.
Okay, go ahead, Eve.
Yeah, I believe that our kids being out and about is a contributory factor to what's happening among our teenagers. In any neighborhood, whether it's in wandering through business districts, or whether they're waiting for a bus, or whatever, or they're riding with people that they don't know, or kids that actually are in opposition to them, instead of, people that are of the same school or the same neighborhood. I would just first say that it is costing us a fortune to do the backflips, while Metro, which is a public company subsidized by taxpayers, is working through its own business plan. And it may not have enough drivers, but they've got enough drivers to add routes at the cost of us. They're making choices for their business plan, and our kids are not part of it. And I think we need to look at the 5 or 6 things that are worse about this, if indeed usage is so much less, meaning we're getting fewer kids to school this way, this safe way. If the tardiness has gone up, how much it's costing us, if it is contributory to where our neighborhood folks are not that happy about having the kids wandering around the neighborhood. And I don't ever want that to get ugly, how they start to criticize and then make our children look bad. So but I do think we should look at the 5 things that are obviously devastating in this data, as well as sort of unwillingness. I think it is a board-to-board letter. I know that sounds stupid, but the sort of people, I'm sorry, sort of board members, you're being lied to. Because they're not getting this message.
Either you like it or don't care.
Or they don't care, and I can't believe they can't care. So I think there's this heavy-duty letter about the cost, the personally cost to our families, whether it's a green city or not a green city, whatever, and what it's doing to our instruction. But Johnny was very clear about, we can't teach them if we can't get them there. And it is inequitable that some families can take them and most of our families can't. And I think, you all know where I am, I think they have broken the contract. And I do think we need to be serious about it. And Dan found out that we are allowed to have these kind of routes.
I don't think we disagree with that. I think we said that. The question for me is the question for me is, they're saying, how do we disprove that they can't hire drivers? That's because that's their rationale for it, is that they're saying they don't have drivers. How do you disprove that? Yeah.
I think you said it. It's just like, and Karen and I were emailing about this, but like they're actively advertising the desire to expand service in other parts of the city.
Well, county in the county. It's about the county.
So it seems to me like.
So they're advertising for it, but are they getting?
They've had routes, added routes.
And like 1 or 2, 17, 58, do we know?
How many routes have you
I don't know.
expanded?
I would just say, even if they're not, like they're choosing.
Could that be part of our open, quest to ask them? How many drivers have been hired for their expanded routes?
That's all I feel. Yeah, or even like, so I agree 100% what you're saying. I think that's a great idea. This is a yes answer. It's like, even if they weren't adding any routes, they're choosing how they allocate the shortage.
Right.
And they're choosing how they allocate it all on.
Yeah, I get it. I'm not opposed to that. I'm just saying, this is, you have to think about, and I want the routes back, but the reality of it is, in terms of where they stand legally, what they're saying, and we have to be able to almost disprove what they're saying. Go ahead.
I think there is a heavy-duty letter that goes board to board. I think we even press it that we're sending this heavy-duty letter, but I also think we do these 5 very most salient facts about the situation, and we report back to council. To Ryan's point, we did have at least a few friends at that meeting that they wanted to report back, and now that we've got the data, they were all asking for data, And we've got the data, and you guys separate data to them, but now we have this reality. Plus, you have the additional piece that we can't seem to get a straight answer that jives with the data of actually one body showing up at school.
And these 5 things, this report that you're saying, we can get pulled together to send to council, should we also send it to the?
Absolutely. And, yeah,
Well, it's, one of the things that the irony of all this, I heard on the news a while back that $25 million being dedicated to the Western Rise Up of Florida Fund. So, I mean, that's,
From the levy.
from the levy.
yeah.
We're having an agreement, I guess, between the groups. in order to make
Big
that
press
happen.
conference, you're right, Ryan. But it's a lot about our kids, again, and the number of our kids are economically disadvantaged in our high schools. Where more than 2/3 of our high schools have more than 85% of our kids that are economically disadvantaged. This is how our children are being treated.
Okay.
I think we should, if our legal counsel says that we're in the right to do it, very publicly make a public records request, because we have to be the stewards of, I would never write a check for something that I couldn't see itemized. And they're saying, no, we're just gonna give you here's this credit card slip, just sign it. Well, what am I paying for here? And I have to think that's public record. At least that we would be required to report it for spending public funds, but since they're funded with public funds, anyway, so either way, I think that has to be an immediate. Can you imagine? We find out we're being billed for 3 times the amount, then maybe we have a leg up and an additional market.
For how many years?
I'm just you know it.
Down.
Right. Great point.
Asking-
You know it.
Okay.
I'm looking for
Okay, so
I'm
I'm
a record request should be everything that Connie thinks you need. And I don't care if it's 10 or 12 things, and I write them big.
So I'm hearing 3 things. One is we want to do a very thorough, comprehensive report of everything County wants as an open record request. 2, we want to do a formal letter, pretty strong letter, with the, I may have this wrong. 5, should this letter be a letter to sort of copy to council and commissioner, or are we doing a separate communication to council?
What do people think?
Well,
I would say copy.
I would say compliment.
Okay, so we can do that, and the letter basically is a statement of position again. We need to include in there those 5, you described it as the 5 most devastating things.
Yeah.
The cost of families, and you might need to help with the.
That is keeping us from doing our mission.
Yeah.
They are preventing us from teaching our children.
And we're putting our children in jeopardy on.
Totally.
The safety
And I think that's what it is,
factors.
Melody's right, that's a contributory factor.
Okay.
Part that I think, the point that she brought up in the text, that potentially puts us in violation of. So, I want to continue to push that narrative too, because I think they're potentially violating our own policies because of this. So there's all of these things combined. And I've maintained for months that I think they're violating our contract, and I still believe that. I think it's a part of it, unless they can prove it to Ryan's point, Ben's point. But this is not interesting.
Yeah.
To me, this isn't.
I really like all the next steps you've made. Can I ask what you or others thought about the idea of Montessori on our turf and like in the media? If there's a reason why it's a bad idea, I'm not tied to it. I'm just trying to explore maybe we would do
I don't know that I wouldn't exactly, I personally wouldn't say it was a bad idea. I don't think it's,
We should not show up.
he's saying invite the CEO or sort of to come to one of our board meetings and have a meeting.
Oh,
I don't think it would be nice.
And do it here and do it.
I think a hearing is a good idea, but I wouldn't give them the platform to make their case. But I would like to hear the principals, and God love them, like all of us, we wanted
Oh, that's such an interesting idea.
the big opening to be positive and upbeat, and thank God those principals came in and they were able to try to sugarcoat it a little bit, but I think it'd be great to hear reality from the schools and from our district administration as to why this is so bad for our children.
Yeah, but let me tell you, that what you just said sort of sparked something in me. I remember when we were in the discussions around FC Cincinnati and the hearings that we had. Jeff Burton, when we invited him to hear, and he heard it raw from the people. So we know our public, they're pretty direct and they're pretty honest, and it wouldn't be a bad idea to have just sort of a public forum where he could listen. He doesn't even have to respond, but he could. It would be like a very special forum, like we used to do with council, with just a joint meeting to hear our public comments. They still may not accept it, because at this point, I think they're about done with us. That's how I feel. But we can at least extend the invitation. I don't know how people feel about that, but
I think it's, when we found out, kind of like did it. Didn't we have a board meeting and sort of was here and our principal spoke, and it was, the principal spoke, but no comments from the community about the budget at all. And they left comments, but it wasn't an intent, okay.
But I did have them come here.
But yes, it was you. Our principals reported, I know.
They reported a much more positive thing, but probably any of them really leaving because it was opening day. I mean, you don't want to have this pall upon the air when we're trying to be upbeat. I think that now that we have data, we've got a whole quarter worth of data. This isn't like just the first 2 weeks. This is how the rest of the year is going to go, or worse.
okay. Well, you all, what do we want to do?
That's not. You just look.
Okay, I got that, but I'm trying to respond to Ben's question about it.
I don't really appreciate what Pam said about it. I think, I'm trying to ask myself, what is going to motivate Florida to change position? And people respond to their loss, and so, this letter targets, and so, I think that seems like a perfectly fine place to start.
Yeah.
I don't know at this point that, hearing our matching would actually do anything.
Let's just start with that, and then we can always revisit another strategy. At some point, I hope we get to a point where, I don't know how long it's going to drag out, or how long, or what we're expecting at the end. I mean, if we're expecting that we're going to have buses, dedicated buses and extra buses, then, we can work toward that till we're blue in the face and we still may not get it. We need to decide at some point, what's going to happen, what's next. And I think the reality of it is, which I've heard people say, is, is this leading to a lawsuit? I don't know. I don't know. But I don't know that we have, I don't know. I'm just not sure if we can continue. At what point do we say enough is enough? Let's figure this thing out. Maybe we can do something different. I don't know. This thing.
One specific to what Tiana said, I do think there has to be a review going back farther than just this one invoice. First and foremost.
Yeah, we
I think that would be interesting pre-COVID.
Yeah.
Because I remember one person trying to present to the audit committee all these great data points from, and finally the audit committee said, well, wasn't this past year just COVID year? So, oh yeah, well, and then that was it. But going back, and then I do think, too, there is the threat of us saying that this is a contract, but let's get here first. And I also think there's an alternative plan besides just having the routes restored. There might be a better way to do this. But they're not even engaging in a conversation about how we could work together to make it better for them and better for us.
Right. I think that might be a legitimate conversation.
Absolutely.
Okay. So does this gives us some guidance as to how we move forward, and Daniel, I'm gonna ask you to draft a letter that certainly the board, we can find, moving in that direction, and then we're gonna work on, you can work with Connie on you all can work on the, right, but then we still have the data piece, looking at the data, we wanna make sure we get all that information.
And just to add, I did talk to Connie, I did have a meeting with Connie and her team with Darryl, and I did share with Connie to put everything in place.
Okay, great.
Conversation.
All right, any other questions, concerns, comments about this particular event? Did we cover what we needed to cover? We didn't.
I think so.
Great.
Yeah.
All right, so we have, in the last 5 minutes, is there anything we need to sum up our meeting? I thought it was a good meeting. It was short and sweet and very to the point. I like that. We good? Okay, having no other business, I declare the meeting adjourned. And, hey, before everybody leaves, I need assistance if you don't